Hey everybody. Since I've recently closed down the pro group, I decided I'd go through the archives and release some of the conversations I've recorded over the last year and a half or so. Let's start this off with my talk with Michael Jerry. We talked about life as an editor and tackle topics like getting started as a podcast editor, client management, business growth, and there's some stories thrown in. And as a bit of a word of warning, this was done over a year ago. I think this was when I was using that terrible Lumina webcam. And if you're watching and are considering that webcam, just do yourself a favor and look at the Logitech Brio or Elgato face cams. And let's see how true it is that people come for the content, because with this video, they're definitely not coming for my video quality. Hey, Michael, thank you for joining me. Just to get started, do you want to give us a little kind of background on how long you've been editing and kind of what got you into that?
I started editing in 2020, March of 2020, right before the pandemic. And what got me into it was I was editing, well, no, I was learning about podcasting through my desire to have one. I was Ubering at the time. And I had, recorded a few episodes in the car of conversations I was having with people, of course, with their permission. And as I got into the actual editing of it, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no clue. So I started looking up, what is a DAW? What type of equipment do you need? All of the hardware aspects of it, and then getting into the software aspects of it. Then I came across Chris Curran's School of Podcasting, or no, what is it? Chris Curran's Podcast Engineering School.
Engineering School.
Yeah. And the other one that I came across was, I think, I almost said Dave Ramsey, but what's Dave? I can't remember his name now.
Dave Jackson.
Dave Jackson, yeah. So, but I chose Chris Curran's, and I really liked the course. It's interactive. It's not just, I'm not saying that Dave Jackson's isn't, but from what I remember, Chris's classes were hitting on the things that I was more interested in. I wanted to be able to ask questions. I don't want to just watch a video, and also have someone there as a mentor so that after, all the classes are done, I could talk. So I hope I'm not being long-winded here. But so after I took his course, I had a much better feel for editing. And then from there went to podcast. Wait, what was it? In March of 2020, there was podcast conference, Podfest. So I went to Podfest, and they had a special session just for editors, and that was cool. So that was my journey into editing. Started out podcasting, not knowing at all, anything about putting a podcast together other than just recording it and talking to people. And so after I learned about editing, I found out that that's what I enjoyed more than the actual interviews and scheduling people and, all the sort of the frontline things that you need to do to get a podcast together. So that's when I started my own business, and I ended up with a couple of clients, and, just took off from there.
And it's good to see that I come from an audio background. I've been doing this for 20 years, working in Logic. So it's always interesting to see what the learning curve is for someone who's coming to this brand new, because that's a viewpoint I haven't had for so long. It's always good to kind of hear those types of stories. What did you find most challenging as you were getting started?
Well, from the business side or the editing side?
Either.
Okay, so it took a while on the editing side for me to really find my groove. I put more pressure on myself than I needed to. to get my rhythm, learning. I think we were chatting one time, and I was saying that I finally got to a point where in my DAW, I can look at the waveform and it's like being in the Matrix, right? You can see the conversation and background noise and clicks and different things like that. So, but it took me a while to get there. And when, as a business, I'm saying, okay, I can have this, here's my turnaround time, and I'm spending, you know, 8, 9 hours just trying to get, a 45-minute podcast done. That was so frustrating because, in my mind, what I'm hearing from Chris Curran School is, oh, yeah, well, it only takes about 4 hours to get an hour podcast done. But yeah, that's with experience. It takes a while to get to that point, and you may even be able to do better. And it really also depends on how much of the work you're doing, right? How much of the processing. Are you just editing out the word fillers and things like that? Or are you processing the audio, EQing it, and all those sorts of things? But that was frustrating, and it was difficult for me to get to a point where I was comfortable with adding new clients and saying, yes, I could do this within a certain amount of time period. From a business standpoint, it was just overwhelming. I didn't know what I didn't know. And wanting to be legal, I set up an LLC. I talked to tax attorneys and, different folks trying to get an understand of what do I need to be cognizant of when it comes to the business side of things, because having a specific talent or skill and making money from that is one thing, but turning that into a business is it's a separate thing. Like you are responsible, you are the talent and the business, so you have to teach yourself both.
There's two ways I see people kind of go into this. They either kind of back into it and realize they have to start learning business as they go, but it sounds like you took the other approach and you decided this is something I want to do and started doing the research to figure out what you needed to do it the right way. Would that be correct?
Yeah, yeah.
But even going that route, I'm assuming there were still some bumps and hurdles. What what did you still find challenging even having done that initial upfront legwork?
Having the comfort levels that I wanted with certain things. So, for example, contracts. I mean, you can read all you want and do all the research you want about having contracts for your clients, and there's a lot of information out there. But having first of all, having an understanding of what your contract needs to include is one thing. Then the next level is, okay, how do I structure this contract in a way that it's not bogged down with 14 pages of legalese, so that when I submit it to a prospective client, they look at it and say, you know what, I'm just going somewhere else. And, how do you make it concise? So, that was a challenge because for me, even though I do research, I still want to talk to someone and say, hey, listen, okay, this is where my head's at. Am I right? Am I wrong? How close to the mark am I? So it's just time consuming is really what it is. And so that takes away from, you know, an hour or two that you could be editing, or just your creative process. So I'm spending more energy thinking about business things, less, and it was impacting my creative because I was trying to learn something new. And of course, I want to be thorough and good with well, not thorough and good, but I just want the business end to make sense. So that was one thing that was a challenge for me, that, and even interviewing lawyers, I did that when it came to contracts. So I realized not just pick one person and go with that guy, but I also had to find an attorney that, was thinking like I was and understood what I was trying to accomplish. So even that was an interesting process. But I got through it.
But one of the things you're talking about that some people do really well that others don't even think about is it seems like you are very conscious of the user experience for your clients or prospects. And that's something I think a lot of us don't put enough effort into in making that transition, that process as smooth for them as possible from, like you were saying, having a contract that's fair to both sides, but it isn't a novel full of legalese where they have to go get go consult an attorney themselves to find out what they're agreeing to. And if when you're dealing with an individual, some of them they're going to be turned off by something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've worked with people that just flat out won't, or we've spoken to people that flat out won't work with somebody that has an agreement because their justification is, don't you trust me?
Mm.
And it's like the agreement is here so we're both on the same page, so that we're speaking the same language, so that you understand what I'm providing to you and the expectations of you working with me.
Yeah, that's important.
But with as far as the business, once you got to the point where you felt comfortable, was it smooth sailing? Was it bumpy? What was your kind of experience? And how long did it take you to get to that place where you felt comfortable?
For me, it's like any relationship. So the business that I set up is a relationship that I had to put time and effort into. So anything that you are spending a lot of time doing, there's going to be some good moments and there's going to be some bad moments. Now, the business doesn't communicate with you in the same way that a person does, but aspects of the business. So, what I mean by that is your clients. That would be, how you communicate with them has a lot to do with whether it's a one contract or a renewing contract type of thing. Whether you even make it through the first contract. Communication is very important. So there were a lot of things that I had to learn, and how do I want to put this? Like, my personality is such that I'm pretty straightforward and honest with what I'm thinking and how I'm feeling and my objective. Some people just don't respond well to that. They want you to sugarcoat things. They have the attitude that they are the customer, that customer's always right attitude. And I don't agree with that. I mean, we're adults. We should be able to have a conversation about things that we agree and don't agree on. And if we're not good partners, then that's okay, because this is a partnership. And so communication is something, and learning how to communicate with people is something that everyone who owns a business should do, because it's one thing when you chop it up with fellow editors and engineers and you guys are speaking your language, right? We're talking in a language that we understand. But when you get on the phone and you're talking to a client, when you're talking about, well, I like to cut around the, 1400 frequency, and you're losing them. You're losing them. So you have to learn you have to be multilingual, bilingual, trilingual, right? And that in of itself is a lot to learn, because you have to separate yourself from the business. Although you're doing everything, you have to understand the hats that you're wearing and the roles that you are playing out when you're the talent, meaning the editor and creative and podcast director. I mean, you're wearing all these hats, but on the business side of things, you can't just, going back to your example of someone who doesn't want to work with people who have agreements. Well, I have to protect myself as a business. I have to protect the business, and the business has to protect me. And so the best way for us to do that is to have a contract which stipulates in legal terms the nature of this relationship. And if you don't have that, you're going to run into problems. And typically people who don't, or clients who don't want to enter into agreements, is because they don't want to be responsible. So, I mean, that takes on many forms, meaning you have deadlines. We have deadlines. I need you to get that to me by Tuesday of every week based on, the conversation we just had. Well, to them, you know, Tuesday could be 11:30 in the evening, right? So if it's not in the contract Tuesday before 5, then for them, I got it to you before midnight. It was still Tuesday. And those are the things that you really need to hash out and have an understanding with.
I think a lot of us go into running a business underestimating the learning curve of running a business.
Yes.
Communications, that was one of the big ones I know Tara and I struggled with at first, is how do we run sales calls or discovery calls? Because we don't like sales tactics. We don't like the hard sell. That's just not us. So it took us a while to find a way of handling them that allowed us to be ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and just working on that communication. Because, like you said, some people don't do well with direct communication. Other people, they need that. And one of the other points that you kind of were bringing up is kind of you're running a business, but you're also the service provider. And I think that's one of the places I see a lot of people get hung up on, is they feel like since they are the business, they have to placate everybody all the time. They don't set up those boundaries between this is me, Jesse, the person who interacts with the clients, versus this is Tansy Astor Audio, the business that has policies and procedures and is the legal part of the contract.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got that business side to put into place these boundaries that you can then lean back on and enforce. And I think that's where a lot of people, especially when they are starting out, struggle, is making that distinction. You can be nice and personable when interacting with the client, but if they're late, you've got these policies and procedures saying, okay, you missed this. My turnaround time's 5 days. You can pay for a rush fee, or your episode's going to go out late.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to feel bad about standing your boundaries.
Mm-mm.
Whereas a lot of people go, oh, you're late. I'll I'll stay up a little bit later or work a little bit longer to get this done for you. And once you do that one time, then two times, that becomes the norm to you. So when somebody gives something to you late, or whatever the situation is, you just feel like you're powerless. And that's
Yeah.
not a good place to be.
But to your point, one thing I would like to add is a lot of times, and this is a very teachable moment here, a lot of times we put ourselves on the back burner for the sake of the dollar because we want the client. And we're teaching people how to interact with us when, as you said, if they're late with getting their assets to us and we just accept that. Now, I'm not saying we got to go in hard every time, like, dude, what are you doing? You messed up. No, I'm not doing your show. We don't want to go in. I'm not saying go in like that, but, maybe make an allowance the first time, but remind them, say, hey, listen, you know, this is really setting me back from some of the other clients and responsibilities that I have. Now, I'm going to accommodate you this time, but I just want to review our policy with this. So if you still want it to go out on time, there is a fee. It's X amount of dollars or whatever you have stipulated in your contract. And that's why when I said earlier, knowing what your contract should look like, because it's going to help you in these very uncomfortable and awkward moments when clients don't give you assets on time, or if they begin to undervalue what you're doing and saying, because you are getting them their work on time or maybe even early, they think, well, I shouldn't be paying you as much. So make sure that you are very well aware of your value in terms of your price and your time, because some customers will push up against that or push back to see how much they can get away with. And remember, your interaction with them, you're teaching them what they can and cannot get away with.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we brought this up in a different call, and what you were saying, kind of let them know, hey, we'll accommodate you this one time. This is kind of a one time courtesy, but reminding them of our turnaround time is this. And I like giving them the option, because when are presented the choice, we're not just kind of imposing something on them. Do you want to pay a rush fee to get it done on time, or do you want to get it back a day late and maybe bump your release day? Because when they have to make that decision, do I want to pay more or do I want to wait?
Mm-hmm.
Then they start to realize, okay, I have a choice in this, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, no, you missed your deadline, you're paying this penalty. And
Mm-hmm.
just, even though it's more or less the same thing, the way you frame it really kind of has an impact. Because kind of a late fee, nobody likes late fees. But if you give them the choice, you can pay a rush or delay your release. Now they have a choice. They're choosing to pay more or they're choosing to delay.
Yeah, I like that. You're right.
Do you have any specific stories about good points or bad points, a great client or a bad client you'd love to share?
I had a bad client that I thought was a good client for a while. Um, there was, and it came down to communication, is again what it boiled down to, because, my rate is what it is. And let's see, how do I want to, it just turned out that the expectation versus reality was a problem, and that boiled down to communication. As an example, I structure my business where in the month of July, I'm off. My son's out of school. I want to make sure that I'm spending as much time with him as possible. So from January through June, I'm grinding. From August through December, I'm grinding. But July, it's just family time. And I had a client that I reminded him that I'll be happy to get as many episodes done for him before July, because, I take the month off. And in his mind, he didn't see it as I actually wasn't going to be doing any editing in that month. I'm not sure where the breakdown in communication was. It was in the contract, but that was one of the sticking points for us when we parted ways, as well as my fee. So, you know, just getting back to the communication point, I think it's really critical.
Did you discuss this when you onboarded the client, that you were off in July, or was it only discussed in the contract?
No, it was on paper. It was on paper in the contract.
But did you go over that with them verbally at some point during the onboarding or discovery process?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's not a lot you can do about that. If you've communicated it to them in person, in the contract, we can't control what other people do or how much attention they pay. I had one of my first clients was taught me a lot about scope creep, and I already knew I needed a strong contract. So I did have everything laid out really strongly in the scope. And it was just a continual back and forth saying, hey, we're going, you told me or your episodes would be 30 to 45 minutes. We're pushing 50, 60 minutes. So we'd have a conversation about needing to watch the length and kind of keep going back to the agreement. We got to like the third interview and it's 75, 80 minutes. Yeah. And this is where I realized the importance of communication. I did not know how to handle it that well. So we kind of kept going and I kept bringing up the issues and she kept justifying it, saying, well, we're just trying to find our feel because it's a brand new podcast. It was my first launch client, so I wasn't quite sure what that was like. So it was kind of a learning process on my end too.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to 2 episodes done. I'm having a meeting with her, kind of explaining we are going way over. In my agreement, I actually had a cap of like 5 or 6 hours of post production per episode. We were going up to 8 hours, and I brought that up and said, I understand you're trying to figure this out, but at the same time, if we keep going down this road, we're going to have to reevaluate the scope and the price.
Mm-hmm.
Let's work on these next 2 episodes to try and fine tune everything so we're not having as many back and forths. And, well, can I listen to this way? We were doing a bunch of bouncing ideas back and forth because she had to hear it to know if she liked it. So we had a ton of revisions. This was like a true crime light narrative where there was music being interwoven during certain parts, and she
Mm-hmm.
needed to hear each piece of music to see how it flowed, and then she didn't
Mm-hmm.
like that and would want another one. So we got through 4 episodes, or after we finished the fourth episode, all of a sudden she's like, okay, I announced that we're going to. Actually, this was before we got the second episode done. She just arbitrarily announced a launch date.
Okay.
And I had told her we need 30 days minimum. We hadn't submitted to anybody, and this was like a week out.
Mm.
So
Wow.
we got through 4 episodes. I told her I can't continue working in this style at this price. What the the work we've been doing is going to cost double this, and we agreed to mutually part ways. I offered to stay on for a couple of episodes in order to give her some time to find another editor.
Yeah.
But yeah, when we first met, we agreed we would have 4 episodes ready to go before we launched. They would be 30 to 45 minutes. We missed all of that. She did agree to pay me for my extra time spent on those episodes,
Good.
which I do really appreciate, but it was one of those things where it's like the communications back and forth. It was a full-time job working on this show. So that's when I talk about bad clients can be time sucks. They can take
Mm-hmm.
up so much time across the board. And you have to go through these types of clients as learning lessons sometimes.
Yeah.
And then I've got a question or a comment from Jennifer. She said, taking the month off sounds great. And she said, one of my qualifying questions is this true crime with lots of elements? Because that's not what I do. And yeah, qualifying our leads is critical because if you don't do narrative, if you don't do true crime, we don't want to waste our time talking to these types of clients. And we don't want to waste their time if we're not going to be a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps on both ends to qualify the types of work we do, what our rates are, or a range of what our rates are. So people who visit your website have an idea of how much to expect to pay, because that's talking to everybody I've talked to on discovery calls without fail, they almost always come down to price. You can be the best editor out there, but I talked to someone earlier that can do a weekly hour-long podcast for $200 a month. Okay, that's a great deal. You should be working with them because I can't even do one episode for that.
Right, right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, it can be very disappointing at times, but you really have to stick to your guns. And sometimes the only way, when I was mentioning earlier about knowing what it is, like knowing your value and knowing what you want in your contracts and things like that, sometimes the only way you learn is through having experiences like that. You know, the one that you went through with, and she wanted to listen to it. And, there were all these revisions. Like sometimes, again, you don't know what you don't know until you go through that and experience it. And you say, you know what? You follow it away in your mind and you say, okay, we're going to make an addendum in the contract that says you get 2 revisions, right? Or whatever you're comfortable with. Or if it's going to be a true crime type podcast or in that style, something narrative, where you already have an idea of what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. And sometimes that's just trial by fire. You learn the hard way, but don't allow yourself to continue to go through those experiences because they are such a time suck and they drain you emotionally, mentally, because there's so much work involved with that. And then when you spend so much time and effort into putting these podcasts together and getting the music right, the beds right, the ads right, all of this stuff on top of the editing. And then, they start to, sometimes they'll pick apart little things, and in your head, you're like, what difference does that make? Listen to this. Like, listen from this point to this point and tell me what you think. But yeah, so sometimes you just have to learn through experience.
And one of the other experiences I've had that this was probably the biggest to kind of stomach was I had a really great client. They talked glowingly about me to their guests afterwards. In emails, they always talked very well about me. I show up to engineer one of their sessions. They asked me a couple questions beforehand while we were waiting for the guest about, hey, do you guys offer show notes? And I told them, we don't, that's not really where my strength is. And then I didn't think much of it. And then we finished the call with them, and they tell me that actually during the call, this was what set off a little sense in me that something was off. Is in the middle of the conversation, one of the hosts had kind of misstarted a sentence and clapped twice and then restarted. This was something we've never done. So that seemed kind of odd to me. Then we wrap
Mm,
up the recording session and they tell me, hey, it's been great working with you, but since you don't do show notes, we're going to start working with this other person or this other company. And will still work with you when we have really big interviews. It's been almost a year and I haven't heard from them.
Wow.
I mean, they sent me Christmas gift the year before. I mean, they did everything you expect a good client to do.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, not expect to do, but they did all of the things that good clients do that show you appreciation for what you do. And
Mm-hmm.
that felt like a big sucker punch. And I know they'd been talking, they joined some kind of podcasting group for business owners. And given that this person, this company specializes in how to, their marketing is all about how to increase sales with your podcast. I'm thinking he'd somehow gotten into this group and gotten into their ear and started doing a soft sell to them and then the hard sell, because by the time they told me, it wasn't about me not doing show notes. Because when we first started working together, I told them we can handle anything they need. We're an all in one agency, but they were asking, like, if I do them personally, but they'd already made up their mind. They were
Yeah.
just kind of using that as a kind of an excuse to move on to working with this other place. And
Yeah.
given that these are business consultants who talk about how to do things the right way, I was really disappointed with how they handled everything.
Yeah. That's a really good story, Jess, because that highlights the nature of business and being self-employed. That sometimes, customers will leave, and you think the relationship between you and the client is great, but behind closed doors, someone's put a little bug in their ear, and like you said, it starts with a soft sell, then it becomes a hard sell. Next thing you know, they start doing things that, the clapping. Like, yeah, if they've never done that before, or you've never taught them that, you haven't had that discussion, someone else has been, whispering things in their ear.
I knew they'd already been working with this place. That's the only way they would know to start clapping, because someone had trained them before this interview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that, and I had to learn, I learned that lesson very early in my employment career, because for a period of time, I worked in outside sales, and I had a client that was a current customer, and I checked up on them frequently, and there were times when we would talk and it had nothing to do with business. We were just conversating, right? And next thing I knew, it came time for a contract renewal, and they went with a different provider. And I know that punch in the gut feeling, when someone leaves you. But sometimes business can be very, I don't want to say brutal, but for us as editors, small business men and women, the relationships that we build sometimes become personal, because we enjoy working with these people, and they have every right to explore their options and part ways with us. However, sometimes, like you were saying, when it's done in a very sneaky, I'm just going to cut the cord, and behind your back, it is a tremendous punch in the gut. And it just, I don't, it's almost soul snatching, because you've worked so hard to build up this relationship, and it's just gone. And that's why I say, I keep using the word relationship. The money is great. Sure, we want the money. We want to be self-employed. But when you put that much time and effort into building up your business, there are relationships there. And part of being a business owner is knowing how to maintain and keep the relationships, and asking the right questions of your clients, which you only learn through time. There isn't a course that's going to teach you everything and you know it up front, because not every person is the same. So just like if anyone who has children knows, you don't treat all of your children the same way. They all have their own personalities and you engage and interact with them differently. And the same is true with business. And sometimes you will have those that will, leave, but it all comes back, I believe, that you'll get someone else to replace them. It may not be for the same amount of money initially. Maybe it will, maybe it'll be more. But the one thing that has to be tried and true is your consistency and your approach towards the business and the creative, like how you are operating within the business. You want to be consistent there. And then the entity itself, the business. So just continue to be consistent. But yeah, I know that feeling, man.
I would have expected that from maybe a big corporate client, but from this client, all they had to do was just be straightforward. Say,
Yeah.
hey, we started talking to this person, this business, whatever they are, and we want to give them a shot. They're talking about some ideas on how to improve our leads with our podcast and increase sales, whatever that is. I would understand that. It would hurt nonetheless, but I understand that's a business decision. And I think that, yeah, it's a big learning experience and one we all have to go through at some point. But I look back, I don't know what else I could have done because we always had good chats before and after the episodes, asking kind of, hey, how's it going? Is there anything I can help you with? They never brought up anything about show notes or do you have any ideas on how we could increase our reach or build our audience or use this to kind of help build our business and get more leads with it? We never
Mm-hmm.
had conversations like that, even though I had asked. So sometimes there's nothing you can really do if the client isn't having the conversations with you that they really need to. I can't help
Yeah.
solve your problems if you're not letting me know what problems exist.
Yep. That's true. But it happens.
Every
Yep.
client you have, at some point, you're probably going to lose them. It's just a part of running a business.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll be from raising rates. Sometimes we're living in an uncertain economic time right now where a lot of people are tightening their purse strings and their wallets and cutting down expenses that aren't absolutely necessary. So some of us are seeing client attrition from that.
Mm-hmm.
There's all sorts of reasons. And like you said, all we can do is be consistent in how we work with clients, how we handle our discovery calls, how we go about trying to find clients. And that's one of the other things that probably the biggest takeaway I got from talking to a business consultant when we were starting up is to set aside about 20% of your work week for unpaid tasks, admin, marketing, all of that stuff. Because if you're working all of your time doing billable work, you're having to give up your personal time to do all of the back end unpaid stuff. And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of in line with you taking all of July off. You've got to account for that time off in your rates.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I did, because, I still have bills to pay in the month of July, and I'm creating new ones, new expenses, right? If I'm doing things with my son. So, those things are all factored into my rates. Because, as you know, one of the questions we always see in the forums is, how much should I charge? And, that's always it depends is the answer. because, what I'm doing with my business and my life is different than, you know, what you are doing, what you are doing with yours. My expenses are different. So you really have to personalize it. The entity, what does the entity need to operate? Okay, so, and when I say entity, the business, in terms of your hardware, all right, are you using a PC? Are you using a laptop? Do you need to upgrade or is it sufficient? What type of software do you need? Your DAW, your editors. I want to say isotope. I'm just drawing a blank on so many things.
RX.
Yeah, RX. And the plugins, right? And we have, well, you have way more plugins than I do, but I mean, even that can drain you, right? You get on that wormhole of, oh man, this is a nice EQ. Well, this one looks better. Well, let me get this synthesizer because I can, do a little thing here when someone wants to sign off and make it sound a certain way. Like you can get caught up in all kinds of things that will be expenses, but on a monthly basis, what do you need for your recording sessions, right? So you have to think about that. You have to think about your own personal expenses. You need to have separate accounts. Please do not have one bank account for your business and your personal life. That is a big no. Don't do that. And there was another point that you made that I wanted to tap in on, but I don't remember. But yeah, so all of those things are, you know, parts of running a business that, not everyone shares with you. And if you don't know to ask, you won't know to do those things.
Exactly. Another one I'd add to that list is personal development, whether that's
Mm,
on the business side, on the skill side, on soft skills, because, like we talked about, learning how to run a business is a it's a continual process, and being able to set aside funds and time to work on personal development is going to go a long way.
mm-hmm.
And to
Yeah,
touch on one of the points you were making earlier, I think that a lot of people underestimate going from doing this as a side hustle to a business, all of the different costs that are associated with it. Because when you're doing it as a side hustle, you probably have another job on a primary job, or you've got a number of jobs that can help pay for some of your expenses. If you're doing this solely as your only source of income, all of a sudden now you've got to look at health insurance. You've got to look at paid time off. All of these different types of expenses that you didn't have before are now sitting there. And that's why my rates are a lot higher than a lot of others, is I don't have another job.
right.
This is where I'm self-employed. So I have to factor in all of these things. We don't live in the cheapest part of the country. If I lived in some really cheap town in the middle of the country with really low living costs, I could charge a lot less. I just wish I could stomach living in a place like that. But we need to be close to the ocean. We need to be close to the mountains. The Northwest is the only place we've lived that has felt like home. So
Yeah,
we have to balance that. And that comes at the cost of having to raise our rates because our living expenses are more expensive. It's not necessarily that my work is 2 times better than someone that charges half of what I charge, but I have different expenses.
mm-hmm.
And kind of on that, I remember having one person ask me, I charge a lot less than you do. What's the difference? What do you do that's better than what I do? And I honestly said, there probably isn't that much of a difference because editing audio isn't, if you're good at it, there's not much difference between someone who's great at it and someone who's just good or even average. The difference there is very minimal when you're talking about the perspective of the listener.
Mm-hmm.
I've done A B tests with clients, I've done A B tests with other people, things I can hear a huge difference in, they can't hear any difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned over the last couple of years is I hear things a lot differently than other people do. I hear a lot more of these details. But at the end of the day, the average listener doesn't hear these things. They don't care about these things. So why are we spending so much time fussing over that last 2% that is going to get lost when you convert to MP3? You probably lose the top 15, 20% of quality when you go to MP3.
We care because we care. And that's the difference, you know. There are a lot of folks that listen to podcasts with one ear, you know, the one earbud folks. You know, those probably, you know, aren't the listeners that you want, but it doesn't mean we have to change who we are. Maybe sometimes adding services, when you talked about personal growth, is a good thing to do. It may open some doors for you. That's why a lot of editors, including myself, have gone into video. But you don't want to spread yourself too thin. So video was something that I hadn't done, but I found it interesting. And the more I played around with it, the more enjoyable it was. So it hasn't become a burden to me in terms of learning a new editor and, you know, different assets for video versus what you need for audio. But when you can combine several tasks that you enjoy doing, then it increases what you're able to do and earn. But like you, anything that comes that, well, I shouldn't say anything. Show notes. You said you don't do show notes. I abhor show notes. Anything that has to do with written word, I am not going to do. Aside from the contracts that I had an attorney draw up for me, right? That is it. But I'm not the guy for that, for show notes and, you know, just that kind of stuff and all that back end stuff. It bores me to death. So I have no problem, you know, subletting that out to someone else if I have a client that wants those things. And, you know, it's a win-win situation for me, the person that I'm hiring to do it, and the customer. And so if you're able to bring people into your network that do things like that and even for example, like cover art. I don't have that talent or skill, but if I have a client that wants it, I mean, I know a couple people, right? So I'm going to add them to my network, bring them into the fold. I've got their price built in. The client doesn't know the difference. They're getting what they want. I'm getting to do what I enjoy, and that person is making some money as well. So, you know, that's a way in which you can add or expand services in addition to your own personal growth and development and learning the business end. And, you know, why do you want to have multiple accounts? What type of accounts do you want to have? You know, what's the bare minimum you need in terms of expenses? You know, do you need to have a Zoom and Riverside, you know, and Squadcast account? I don't know, maybe you do. Maybe you have clients that will only work with those accounts and it's affordable for you to do that because you've got it built in. Or can you just use Riverside for all of your, you know, recording sessions? But those are things that you have to decide and learn through the conversations and experiences that you have with your clients.
What you just were talking about is huge because so many editors feel like if their client asks them for show notes or cover art, that we have to say yes to it and do it all ourselves. And you can give so much more value to your clients by outsourcing that to people who are great at that versus doing something that's average or even below average. You don't want me writing your show notes. You just don't.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
I can give that to my wife. She'll put something together that will make you want to listen to this show.
Right. Yeah.
She has the gift of writing words and telling a story and drawing you in. That's something I don't know how to do that. So I'm going to let her do her thing. And that's how we start to build almost an agency type structure by outsourcing the tasks that don't make the most for us or that we're not particularly strong at.
Mm-hmm.
But Michael, I want to thank you for joining us. Jennifer, did you have any questions before we wrap up? We might have put Jennifer to sleep. We were kind of unsure about that yesterday on our call, but she piped up saying, I'm still here.
It's funny.
So yeah,
Yeah, and we
she's
didn't go
just
deep in the
here.
weeds with,
Go on.
huh? No, I was going to say we didn't even go deep in the weeds with, things that could really put her to sleep, like compression and EQ and, apps and plugins and, RX. Yeah, we really could have put her down.
She said, thank you. Very inspiring. My contract needs work for sure. But yes, thank you, Michael, for joining us. And
My pleasure.
we'll end. And Jennifer, I'll talk to you later.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yep. I want to take a moment to thank Michael for joining me for this talk. I love his thoughts and his approach to running business, or his business, I should say. And he's got a great voice for podcasting. But I want to know, what did you take away from this interview? Can you relate with any of the topics that we covered? Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're looking for help with your business or just want to become a better editor, head over to Tansiaster Academy. I'm here to help. And if you enjoyed this video, check out this playlist over here that tackles the business side of podcast editing. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.